Yeah. Okay, I think that I will be around. So if you have any other questions, I think that we can open up towards the end. So now, just to keep the flow going, so we'll be transitioning to our next presenter. With us, we have here Rodrigo Onofre, and then he will be discussing with us an update on disease. So we have a few questions, I think, let's see, more on the disease side. Rodrigo, ready?
Yes.
Good.
Thank you for the introduction. And
yes.
There you go. Hello, everyone. Well, first, thank you for the invitation, Josh, and yes, Corn Commission here. Ignacio, thanks for the introduction too. So as Ignacio mentioned, today we're going to be going some of the most important disease here that we're seeing and some of the new ones that we found here in Kansas, right? And I think it's a good transition between fertility to the disease because the fertility will also play an important role here as we're going to see for some of the disease, right? And starting with one question that was submitted before here, the meeting, I'm just going to read it here. Regarding tire spot, is this a disease that works from the top down like southern rust, or does it work from the bottom up, the canopy, right? Or is it both, where it first year comes from the top and then the future years from the bottom to the top? Just have had this debate among co-workers and different answers. Also, is there any praxis that are helping suppress pressures besides rotation, fungicides, and trait packets, right? So starting with tire spot, it's a new topic for us here in Kansas. As you can see, I have there a picture showing the symptom. Starting with the symptom, as you can see, it's this black structure that will develop on the surface of the leaf husks, basically any tissue above ground, right? As the disease develops, you can start seeing that necrotic tissue around the lesions. And one of the main things with tire spot and identification, if you rub your finger on those lesions, it will not come off, right? Those lesions are hard, and sometimes you can even feel it when you're trying to identify out in the field. And a little bit of history on tire spot. Tire spot was first detected in US in 2015. And since then, it has spread through several states, right? Several of the major states. And we're going to be looking at a map here in a second. But what's really important for us here in Kansas is that it was detected in Nebraska and Missouri 2021 season. And this year was last year, I'm sorry, 2022, we found it here in Kansas, right? Late in the season, and we're going to be talking a little bit about it too. So here, I'm just showing you where tire spot has been reported in US, right? So as you can see, it's in the major corn production areas in the state, but also there's a little bit of southern Florida, that gray, solid gray there is also where it has been reported. It was just reported in Georgia, Kentucky, and it's pretty widespread. And now Nebraska, Kansas, and South Dakota are the three new states added into this map. When we're looking into Kansas, and I have here this website, the Corn IPM Pipe. This is a really good tool if you're out there and trying to keep track of tire spot. Has it been reported in my county? Where it is, where it has been reported, right? So if you go to this website, Corn IPM Pipe, you can follow, and those updates is throughout the season, right? We approve them and they pop there. So two things, it's important to follow where tire spot is being reported, but it's also important to send us if you found it, right? If you're in doubt, you can send a sample to myself or to the plant diagnostic lab here at K-State, and we'll make sure to proper identify and proper follow through with recommendations for your farm. So in Kansas, it's being reported in the northeast part of the state, on that corner there, which makes sense looking at the distribution of tar spot where it was reported before. And when I was there scouting some cornfields, it was interesting because we start seeing disease from the top of the plant, from the top of the canopy, making its way down to the canopy, right? And of course, we didn't see on that lower canopy any symptom, was more like mid up in that canopy, which tell us that this disease has a high chance that was brought to Kansas by wind or some sort of like a storm that kind of like brought some of those spores. Tar spot, it does survive in corn residue. It's interesting disease because it's a biotrophic, which needs organism to survive. However, tar spot does survive on that corn residue over the season. So if you're doing corn on corn and you had tar spot last year, there is a high chance that you might see it again in the following season, right? And knowing that, it's just you start to think about management. How can we manage this disease? So in terms of some of the biology behind this disease, right? Tar spot likes that 60 to 73 Fahrenheit temperature, high relative humidity, and prolonged leaf wetness period. So when we think about irrigation or rain, the more we have it, more we're gonna have that leaf wetness, right? And that's kind of like the perfect storm because irrigation and rain will cool the plants a little bit, will make it that favorable condition, increase relative humidity, and that's when we start seeing more and more disease. Every picture that I have in this presentation was taken from Kansas. So that was a field in Jonathan County where we found tar spot was pretty much late in the season. A lot of the corn was already harvested, but that field was about 300 acres and it was pretty widespread. From one corner to the next corner, we found tar spot basically in every plant that we found. We look in that field, right? We believe that it came in late last season when we found it was too late to cause any yield damage and compromising that yield. However, for the following seasons, it's definitely something for the grower there to be on the lookout and us as well to be looking for this disease in Kansas. As I mentioned here, the weather does play an important role for tar spot in terms of severity, how bad it will be. We still don't know how tar spot will look like in Kansas, in Kansas corn production, just because it was founded last year. Some of the northern states, and I have a graph here in the following slides, they're definitely having a major problem with tar spot up there. But we still have a lot to learn from this disease. So I was mentioned, I just put together some of the states that have had tar spot in the last 4 years. And as you can see, when we're looking at Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin, I would say those are the 4 states that have had major problems with tar spot. And those bars are basically the yield loss caused by tar spot alone, right, across the state. So 6%, for example, in 2021 in Michigan, say it's pretty significant for the state. And Nebraska just started last 2021. In 2022 season, I was there with Tamara. We did visit a few fields where disease was kind of like catching up. And something for us, again, to keep in mind, right? This disease does have a potential for cause a significant yield impact. But again, we still don't have much information from Kansas. In terms of damage, we're thinking about grain, right? But also silage can also be a problem when we have tar spot. These pictures were taken from the same area, the same field, and as you can see, just 13 days apart. How tar spot, here we have early infection and then 13 days later under favorable conditions for disease development, how it can damage silage quality, right? So just another example here that not just will affect grain yield, but also silage quality. So now I'm gonna be showing some of the pictures that I took from last season. Again, it was kind of like late in the season when we found it, but you can see in the dry tissue, more senescent tissue late in the season. It's kind of like when we found it. It was probably already time to harvest that corn. But here we have a lot of lesions. It's kind of like, look, this pepper-like lesions, right? And it produces a lot of spores. There will be many cycles within one season of that disease, just keeping producing more and more spores. Just a few more pictures that I have here. It can show up in both sides of the leaf, not just on the top, but on the bottom side of the leaf as well, green tissue or more senescent tissue. Here is just to compare how it looks in a green tissue and a more senescent. Sometimes you can see these fish eye lesions where they're more elongated than the rounded ones. So don't get like fixing only one thing here, right? So, and again, if you find tire spot, make sure that you're rubbing your finger over those lesions, because most of the time when I was scouting in the years before, it was mainly insect poop for what it is, right? And it's important for us to, one, manage at the right time, but also to be proper identifying. There's another disease, we'll be talking a little bit about it today, southern rust, when it's more like on that late season when the spores of southern rust are becoming more dark. It can look like tire spot. It can be confusing if you're out there in the field. So again, just to make sure that we're properly identifying, right? So one of the pictures here, I'm just showing you that this disease can move up into that tassel upper leaves in the canop, right? But just a few more a few more pictures here for us. And as we have here some picture of the stem and that ear leaf, as well as the husk, right? Again, this disease arrived here in Kansas late, but we still we did see a lot of disease yet late in that season. And I don't think cause any yield impact just because of the timing on that. It probably came around R5 on that physiological maturity, as Ignacio was mentioned, the growth stage figure, right? It's also important for us to see when we're going to be considering that spray application. There's some publication already showing that our current fungicides are effective against tire spot, which is a good news. And what they see is that an application at R1 can increase or protect between 20 bushels to 40 bushels, depending of the intensity of tire spot in your field. Just a few more pictures here, how it can look like. And again, those pictures, they were from Kansas, right? So how do we manage this? Tire spot will take more than one tool, right? It's gonna be like an integrated management, starting with hybrids. There are good hybrids. There's not like a bulletproof hybrid. However, there are better hybrids than others. So if you're out there looking to buy seed or recommend seed to your customers, make sure that if you're in that zone between, I would say, Northeast Kansas, start thinking about choosing good hybrids for tire spot, right? Crop rotation, as I mentioned, this pathogen survives in corn residues. So managing, reducing that corn residue will definitely help reducing that inoculum, the initial inoculum. Irrigation, irrigation and rain is more on that leaf wetness, right? I know last season drought was our major problem here in Kansas. However, fields that are under irrigation can be more at risk than dryland corn, right? So if you are looking for fungicides, there's a very nice table at Crop Protection Network, which we contribute with data from Kansas. And they will have not only tire spot, but every other disease that it's important for us here in Kansas, such as gray leaf spot and southern rust, right? So here you can see the efficacy table, what's good or very good. What we have seen for tire spot so far is products with more than one active ingredient are the best for this disease. So if you're out there looking for a good product, just make sure that you're choosing at least 2 or 3 active ingredients to suppress tar spot. So question number 2 that was submitted to us was regarding corn smut in Southwest Kansas. So if you were out there, you probably saw some fields. Those 2 pictures were taken there in the southwest part of Kansas. And the second picture here, the first one is how corn smut looks like at that end of the season, right? It's basically those galls that develops, can be in the ear and up in the stem, on the leaf sometimes. But here we have a combine going to a field, and all that black spores or black smoke that you're seeing there, it's not fire, it's corn smut. This was a really bad field on that southwest part of Kansas. And I think when we look back and we try to understand what was happening there, there was, well, a couple of things that happened, right? One is starting planting a susceptible hybrid. If you choose a good hybrid with resistance to corn smut, that should help, I would say 90% choosing selection hybrid, right? Early in the season, I think corn was around V6, V8. There were some dusty storm, and later in the season, there was some hail event too. Anything that caused an injury or like insect damage to the plant makes it's susceptible for this corn smut. And this fungus survives in crop residue. So if you're doing corn on corn and have had corn smut problems in the past, then definitely make sure to try to a rotation or even selecting a good hybrid with good resistance for corn smut. High nitrogen levels will make the plants more susceptible to corn smut, just because the leaves are going to be more, let's say, easy to that pathogen to colonize, right? So making a good balanced fertility, making sure that you're not pushing to the extreme under those circumstances where you have had corn smut problem would definitely help to mitigate this problem. Typically, we don't see like we're seeing here with this combine, right? But every other year there are fields that corn smut can be a problem. Fungicides, they're not effective to this disease, so there's not much to do at that point regarding fungicide application. So it's just my timing here. So just 2 other diseases that we're going to be covering today, being southern rust. Last year, as I mentioned, it was a dry year. We didn't see as much, came in pretty late in the season, right? But as a reminder, southern rust has those small numerous circular spots, as we can see in these pictures. It's a very bright orange, and it likes that warm and wet. Rust, like tar spot, kind of like that leaf wetness. It needs that water to germinate and colonize the plant. Every year blows from the south, and you can do the same thing here. Click on this website, Crop Protection Network, to read more about this disease. And you can also keep a track of it on that same corn IPM pipe website. For tar spot and southern rust, it's excellent to see where it's being reported in US, right? Common rust, although the name says common, it's not as common for us here in Kansas. We do see it more early in the season when temperature is around that 60, 70 Fahrenheit. But it kind of like never takes off for us just because of our weather conditions, right? It's more oblong, elongated lesions, and it has more of that cinnamon reddish coloration here. And another way to differentiate these 2 rusts is that southern rust typically will not produce spores in the bottom of the leaf, and common rust, it's kind of like on both sides, right? So if you're considering a fungicide application, just make sure that what you have, it's southern rust, it's the one that we would be considering a potential fungicide application just to protect that yield, depending when it arrives in Kansas. As I mentioned, the corn IPM pipe website, you can select your southern rust, keep a track of the disease. Can also select tire spot, which is another one that's it's important for us. And the last disease that I want to touch base here is gray leaf spot, right? Gray leaf spot, we do find it almost every year here in Kansas, can be a problem if you're under irrigation, corn on corn. The symptoms can vary between hybrid, but it takes about 2 weeks to develop from those small rounded lesions to those more elongated lesions. Gray leaf spot has a very sharp edge, and the lesions tends to be elongated, as I'm showing here in the top picture, right? This disease starts from the bottom up. If we go back to that first question, right? Does it start from the top or from the bottom? Gray leaf spot survives in corn residue, so it starts from the bottom up into the plant. Different than solar rust, which blows from the south every year, so we expect to see more on that mid-upper canopy when we're out there scouting. So just to show in a susceptible hybrid, we'll expect to see more elongated, those sharp edge lesions. However, the resistant hybrid, we can see lesions still, but they never take off, right? Our current fungicide recommendation is if you're planting a resistant hybrid for gray leaf spot, we don't recommend a fungicide application just because that resistant from the hybrid will take care of it. However, if you're planting a susceptible hybrid, there are some recommendations where we're looking into more, depending when it arrives, when it's showing up, you might consider a fungicide application for gray leaf spot. What's going to be interesting to see how tire spot will play in Kansas, it's kind of like putting together the three main important diseases here on the foliar part, right? So southern rust, when it arrives from the southern states, gray leaf spot when it's starting to show up, and tire spot if becomes a problem for us in the next few seasons. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Maybe we should check the chat here.
Yeah, you have a few questions in the chat, Rodrigo.
Go to the first one. The star spot comes off on your hands. No, it does not come off on the hands. So it's, as I mentioned, if it comes off, that's insect poop. So just make sure that you're testing that, right? And if you have questions, feel free to send to my cell phone here too. We can look into the pictures. Will tar spot infect forage sorghum or grain sorghum? That's a very good question. We do not have any reports in US that tar spot cross infection corn and sorghum. However, sorghum in I think Australia does have a tar spot disease. And I think there needs to be more research on this part too, more on the biology of the pathogen. So far, in the past 5 years, since 2015, that was reported in US, there's no report of cross-infection between sorghum and corn. Is it like to have southern rust and tar spot in that same year? Yes, you can definitely have southern rust and tar spot. And again, both disease you can track on those corn IPN pipe, and I think southern rust could be a problem for us in Kansas if arrives early on that tasseling R1 period, and the same thing with tar spot on that temperature threshold. For us, it's either early in the season or late in the season, so we still don't know how tar spot will play a role here. But we could definitely have both diseases on that same year. Are there dangers for cattle that graze on corn stubble? I never heard about tar spot in terms of causing any damage for cattle here, but I could look into that too. So sorry for that one. After planting Jura, does nutrient foliar application help with ears mud? I never look into that. It's a very systemic disease, and I don't believe that it would do anything. And Ignacio is also agreeing here with that. So yes, so there's not much to do after we see that smut growing into the ears at that point. Any other question? Thank you very much.